Are you a Martha or a Mary? If you're like Martha, maybe you find yourself distracted, preoccupied, almost pulled apart by your varying competing responsibilities, people and commitments pulling you in opposite directions. Maybe you find yourself to be perpetually anxious and worried. Even now, in this moment, listening to a sermon about not being distracted, you find yourself being distracted about all the things you still have to do today. Hurry it up, Pastor, move it along. I'll try my best. Or maybe you're more like Mary, a bit more of a contemplative, grounded, rooted, present in the moment. You don't find yourself anxious about much of anything because you have discovered the secret to life is realizing that you don't have much of control of anything at all. Are you a Martha or a Mary? The truth is, Martha and Mary probably represent two ends of a great spectrum that we all find ourselves moving back and forth between the two ends depending on the day and the circumstance. You put me on a beach with a book and a drink with a little umbrella in it, and I am a Mary 10 times out of 10. But find me in my kitchen at the end of a stressful week on a school day, trying to get dinner on the table, my kids screaming and fighting and screaming some more. The house is a mess, and absolutely I am a Martha. I'm not afraid to admit it. Are you a Martha or a Mary? Or a little bit of both? When Jesus came to the town of Bethany, which is where Martha and Mary lived with their brother, Lazarus, Martha invited Jesus into her home. And then Martha started doing what any good host does: prepare a meal, set the table, make sure the house looks in order. And Jesus certainly would not have been the only person in the house. Most likely a whole group of people, disciples, followers, townspeople, sitting and listening to Jesus. And if you've ever cooked a meal for a large group of people, you know it's a lot of work. And Martha is doing what is especially expected of women in first century Jewish culture. Men were allowed to hang out in the living room, talking, listening, laughing, while the women were expected to be behind the scenes, in the kitchen, getting the meal ready. In fact, this story is especially radical because it challenged the gender norms of the day. The Jewish Mishnah, which is a collection of teachings from ancient rabbis, says this: "Let thy house be a meeting house for the sages, and sit amid the dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst. But talk not much with the womenkind." I didn't write it, okay? In other words, Martha is doing what she was expected to do. But Mary, sitting at the feet of Jesus, is doing what the men were expected to do. But what did Jesus have to say about that? Mary has chosen the better part, and that will not be taken away from her. And you'll notice this interaction in the Bible comes right after Jesus' parable about the Good Samaritan. A parable about a Samaritan man who comes across a victim who has been beaten and left for dead, and it's the Samaritan who has compassion on him. And remember, the Jewish people hated Samaritans. They consider them ethnically and religiously unclean. So Jesus has just challenged the cultural boundaries around ethnicity, immediately stepping into a situation where he is challenging the cultural boundaries around gender. Mary has chosen the better part, and that will not be taken from her. But all that said, I happen to believe that Martha has been cast as a villain in this story, and that's no fault of hers. Unfairly cast as a villain. And I think a lot of us, men and women, can empathize with her stress and anxiety. Again, she's doing what the people expected her to do. One scholar put it this strongly: in the ancient world, hospitality was viewed as the pillar that all morality rested on. Hospitality. In other words, in a time when hotels and restaurants were scarce, being a good host was considered the pinnacle of all virtue. And as a Jew, one of Martha's great heroes would have been the patriarch Abraham. And one of the most well-known stories in the Old Testament, Abraham hosted 3 angels. You know the story from Genesis 18? Abraham sees the 3 visitors coming along, and what does he do? He runs to them to greet them. And what does he do next? He runs to his wife and says, prepare some cakes. And then what does he do next? He runs to go get a calf. He's running this way and that, and then he stands full attention as the angels eat their meal. He is the model host that Martha would have known and respected. So here is Martha, trying to play the good host, trying to get a meal on the table for all these guests, which included Jesus, the Lord. It's a high-pressure situation. You want things to go well. All the while, her sister is sitting with the men. Can you picture Martha loudly clanking the pots and pans, trying to get her attention? Those little passive-aggressive things that we do, before she finally goes to Jesus. Can you resonate with Martha just a little bit here? I mean, on a superficial level, it makes a lot of sense to be worried and distracted in this high-pressure situation. And one of the reasons this story speaks to our own lives so strongly is because as humans, we're all prone to worry and distraction and stress. Because many of the things that we worry about are actually quite real. Like, are my kids going to be okay? Am I going to have enough money to pay my bills this month? Am I going to have enough money to retire someday? What am I going to do if I lose my job? What am I going to do if I can't find a job? Who's going to look after my family if something happens to me? Or what if something happens to my spouse, or God forbid, my kid? What if they get sick? What if they're already sick? What now? Or what if I'm going to be alone forever? What if I never find somebody? What if I can't have kids? What if I can't get my addiction under control? What if I can't get over this depression? Have you ever been anxious about being anxious? That's a fun one. Anxiety is scary because a lot of the things that we worry about in life are real. Yes, sometimes they are things that we make up in our head, but a lot of times they are not. But even more so in today's world, the felt experience of anxiety is on the rise. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, the most prevalent mental illness for adults in the United States, anxiety disorders. It's the number one. Bigger than depression, addiction, personality disorders, and it's the same among teens. Anxiety has officially replaced depression as the number one mental health problem amongst adolescents. 10% of teenagers are on anxiety medication. But why is this growing? The philosopher J.P. Moreland writes this: I'm convinced that anxiety rate is higher today than it has ever been. Why? Because of the conditions present today in American culture. The rapid pace that we live in, the bombardment we receive with technology, the isolation we experience in a hyper-individualistic society are extreme, and we are living with stress and more stress. And then he says, indeed, we are so used to being under stress that we don't even realize it anymore. We've stopped noticing it because it's the new normal. Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. You know what? Jesus is not condemning Martha here. He's actually just sad for her. He's not trying to chastise her for being anxious. He's actually grieving her experience with her. When you repeat someone's name twice in the Bible, it is a way of grabbing their attention with all seriousness, but it's also an expression of grief. When King David mourned the loss of his son, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, my son Absalom." And what did Jesus cry out on the cross? My God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus is sad for Martha. Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. The word distracted in verse 40 literally means to be pulled and jerked from one thing to the next. Do you ever feel that way? Parents? So the question becomes, what do we do about our anxiety? How do we navigate the countless distractions we experience in life? We have a story here of two sisters, one who is worried and anxious and distracted, and then there is Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus. Sitting at the feet of Jesus wasn't just an insignificant detail, by the way, of where Mary happened to be during this interaction, but it is a phrase that has to do with discipleship. In the book of Acts, chapter 22, Paul says that he was brought up at the feet of Gamaliel. Gamaliel was a famous rabbi at the time, and studying at his feet was a way for Paul to describe, I was a disciple of Gamaliel. In Acts chapter 4, Christians would sell their possessions and then they would bring their money to the feet of the apostles, which is a way of saying that they were bringing their resources under the authority of the apostles. This scene of Mary sitting at Jesus' feet was symbolic of her stepping into the role of discipleship. It's a way of saying that she is coming under the authority and teaching of Jesus. And Mary would go on to be a disciple who pays very close attention to the teaching of Jesus. She's the one in John's gospel, before Jesus is betrayed, who anoints his feet to prepare for his baptism while all the men disciples don't have a clue what's going on. And then verse 39 says, as Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, she was listening to what he was saying. Discipleship begins with listening. Now, we actually don't know what Jesus taught that day in Mary and Martha's living room, but there are several reoccurring themes in the Gospel of Luke that speak directly to the issues of anxiety and distraction and worry. And I think that there are three that we want to highlight this morning that I think are especially relevant to us in our own anxiety. And each of these themes has a corresponding worry that goes with it if you follow along. And the themes that I want to look at today are the material theme, the formational theme, and then what I'm calling is the sovereign theme. And I'm just briefly going to explain these to you. But first, the material theme. It's this idea that Jesus constantly encouraged us to reevaluate our attachment and our relationship to material things. Jesus said in Luke 12, "Do not worry about your life, what you will eat and what you will wear." And then he said, "Sell your possessions, give alms, make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys." According to a number of studies, the things that Americans worry about most is money. Do I have enough? We live in the wealthiest country ever to exist. We have more stuff, we have more money, we've got more things than any other society in the history of the world, and yet we are simultaneously the most anxious. What? How is that possible? Could it be that the more you have, the more you have to worry about? And yet Jesus said life is so much more than stuff. That's why Jesus taught, be generous. Start giving some of that stuff away. All the things in your closet, all the things in your garage, all the things in your storage unit, or all the things in your second storage unit. Do you really need them? Let it go. Simplify. Give that stuff away. Sell it off. Give more. Have you ever been around really, really wealthy people before? You know that they can get kind of anxious about their stuff, especially if you bring 4 children into their home. But the reality is, if you don't have nice jewels and a Rolex watch, you don't have to worry about losing those things. It's like when you buy a brand new car. Every little scratch on the interior, When you don't have that nice stuff, you don't worry about it. But of course, there is a very real reality that there are plenty of folks in our world today that are living paycheck to paycheck. And this isn't about, having nice things. It's about having anything. But this is why Jesus constantly stresses to us, you need to trust in the goodness of God. Consider the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, and aren't you of far more value than they? God's going to take care of you. Even in the most extreme situations, God will take care of you. A second theme in the teaching throughout Luke's gospel is this teaching around the formation of your character. We inherently believe that the purpose in life is that everything goes according to our plan. But this is the cause of great anxiety for us, is it not? That's not a part of the plan. Because the truth is, Jesus cares far more about the formation of your character than you getting the things that you want, than having your life go according to your plan. Do you know how many times I have met someone who has spent the majority of their life planning for and saving for their retirement, only to have within the first 5 years of that retirement date have a massive, miserable, life-changing crisis? I have lost count of how many times I've seen it happen. Kind of makes me never want to retire. Jesus said in Luke 9, if you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will save it. What does it profit them to gain the whole world but forfeit their soul? What he is saying is that when you become a Jesus follower, you deny yourself and you deny your great plan for your life. And when you come to a place where you start letting go of what you had dreamt or planned on and have it open-handed, then there is a great release of anxiety. It all has to do with your willingness to surrender to the illusion of control. Because you never had control to begin with. But this is by far the most terrifying part of being a Jesus follower, surrendering control. But not just surrendering what your plans were supposed to be, but surrendering your very understanding of who you were supposed to be. C.S. Lewis puts it this way in Mere Christianity. Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he is doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew all those jobs needed doing, and so you're not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably, and it does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a cottage, but he is building a palace. And he intends to come live in it himself. Lewis is talking about your character. And the best thing you will ever do in your life is to open your hands and surrender yourself to the work and presence of God in your heart. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Psychologists call this radical acceptance. Christians call it surrender. And when the hard time comes, even in those hard times, you must choose to believe in the goodness of God. Which leads to the third theme, and this one is really important because the second theme doesn't make sense. It doesn't quite hold up unless you believe in the third theme, and it's what I call the sovereign theme, or to put it another way, it is the eternal nature of Christ's teaching. And what I mean by is this life is not all there is. Death is not the end. We follow Jesus not just because he gives us good advice, not just because he's a good moral teacher, but we follow Jesus because, as the Apostle Peter once said, where else will we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. We follow Jesus because he is the giver of life. Scholars have called Jesus the apocalyptic preacher, meaning that he spoke often of the end times, heaven and hell, the shortness of life, final judgment. Of course, Jesus taught about forgiveness and love, but if you look at his parables, the most common theme, the thing that reoccurs the most, is the theme of eternity. Keep watch ye therefore, because you know not when the master of the house cometh. It is all over his teaching. Think about the parable of the rich fool. A rich man, had an abundant crop. So much. But instead of sharing his good fortune, what does he do? He tears down his storehouses and he builds larger ones so that he can have more. But God said to him, "You fool! Do you not know that this very night your life is being demanded of you, and these things that you have prepared, whose will they be?" So it is so to those who are rich on this earth, but not rich towards God. The veil between this life and the next is thin. So Jesus taught, keep alert, watch out, understand how time works, be prepared. Is your soul ready? Because the veil between this life and the next is thin. As Romans says, whether it be in life or death, we belong to the Lord. Or as 1 Peter 5 says, cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. As we so often sing, he is a good, good father and the one you can put your life into his hands. Philosopher Dallas Willard calls us ceaseless spiritual beings. He said, "You will never cease existing. So what are you going to do about it?" The problem isn't death, it's life. Eternity is not later, it's now. So learn to live eternity now. Once you understand that you are a heartbeat away from eternity, it puts all of the other anxieties and worries in their proper place, because you see how the story is going to end. But perhaps you've heard all this before and you're still quite anxious. I get it. But that's the power of this passage. You must choose to listen to the words of Christ. You must choose daily to come like Mary did to the feet of Jesus and listen to the voice that is speaking to you. What is he saying? In 2023, a plane carrying 7 passengers crashed deep in the Amazon rainforest, one of the most remote places on the face of the earth. The plane was flying in southern Colombia when its engine failed. All 7 people, including 4 children, were presumed dead. But when the crash site was discovered, they only found 3 adult bodies, and the 4 children were missing. All of them were siblings, the 4 siblings, ranging from the ages of 13 years old to 11 months. No trace of them nearby, just absolute silence in the jungle. Weeks went by. Rescuers dropped food and water and whistles in the jungle, unsure if the children were even alive. But amazingly, they were. They were just hiding because they were scared. Scared, not knowing if the rescuers were friends or foes. The government intensified its search. 150 soldiers, 40 volunteers, rescue dogs. All the while, clues kept on emerging. Tiny footprints here, a baby bottle, used diapers. 40 days in the jungle. Do you want to know how the kids survived? Rescuers recorded the voice of the children's grandmother, saying to them, "Stay in one place, help is on the way." And they broadcasted it on speakers in the heart of the jungle amongst the trees, and her familiar voice calling out to them, "It's okay, stay where you're at, help is on the way." On day 40, the children were found, starved, bitten, exhausted, but alive. And what drew them out was not the rescuers, it was not the food, it was the familiar voice of their grandmother that they chose to listen to. You have to choose. You got to choose to listen to that voice. "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." What is he saying to you today? Let's pray.